Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents COVID-19 and World Order, the Future of Conflict, Competition, and Cooperation. Edited by Hal Brands and Francis J. Gavin. Narrated by Mike Lenz. Publisher's note: this audiobook refers to figures included in the print and ebook editions of the book. Forward. In the heart of Frankfurt, Germany, stands the IG Farben building. Completed in 1930, this massive and seemingly indestructible triumph of modernist design was named for its first owner, the IG Farben Company, at the time Germany's largest chemical conglomerate. Within the decade, IG Farben became deeply entangled with the Nazis and was eventually complicit in many of the worst atrocities of Hitler's Germany, including the manufacture of the notorious Zyklon B gas used in concentration camps. Following the Allied invasion of Frankfurt in March 1945, the building was evacuated and the corporation's executives arrested. When General Dwight D. Eisenhower touched ground and saw that the IG Farben headquarters was one of the few structures in the city to have survived the assault, he decided to make it the center for Allied operations. From his office on the first floor, he not only oversaw the end of the war, but also began the meticulous task of rebuilding democracy in Germany out of the ashes of violent dictatorship, an endeavor that, in turn, seeded the ground for a new liberal world order to emerge. Today, the Farben building exemplifies the very best of that world. A part of the Goethe University in Frankfurt, it serves as the entry point to the university's sprawling, modern campus. No longer merely a monument to human evil, it is a portal to free inquiry, vigorous debate, and the exchange of ideas that allow global society to thrive, and in times like ours, to survive. The story of the Farben building serves as a metaphor for the trajectory of our world over the past century, embodying the victory over brutal fascism and genocide, the construction of an international system committed to creating a more just, peaceful, and prosperous world, and the difficult, ongoing work of sustaining that project through institutions that forge partnerships and lay the foundation to address global society's most daunting problems. Yet, as observers and scholars have carefully documented, that order is fracturing. Soaring economic inequality and rapid demographic change have fueled populist resentment, ethno-nationalism, and a sweeping distrust in national and international institutions alike. In parallel, massive shifts in technology and communication have heightened the avenues for surveillance and enabled the proliferation of disinformation. And with the increasing prominence of China on the world stage, along with new waves of authoritarianism cresting across the globe, it is clear that we inhabit a multipolar world whose aims and values no longer necessarily align with those of liberal democracy. At this moment, 54% of the world's population now lives under some form of authoritarian rule. The COVID-19 pandemic has only accelerated these trend lines. The United States' failures to control effectively and mitigate the virus are reflective of its diminished role as a geopolitical leader, while China's admittedly flawed but far more deliberate response has only affirmed its centrality in the 21st century world order. Meanwhile, the European Union can no longer claim to be a body composed of democratic states. In the early days of the pandemic, Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary used the virus as a pretext for seizing emergency powers that all but extinguished what little remained of Hungary's once promising democracy, consolidating Hungary's position as the first authoritarian state to be an EU member nation, something virtually inconceivable a generation ago. COVID-19 marks a moment of reckoning for our era. While this disease, thankfully, is not likely to claim as many lives as the period from 1939 to 1945 did, its impacts on the global economy, on democracy, on public health, on food security, and on governance will reverberate for years to come. It is a multidimensional emergency that requires the efforts of all disciplines, a public health crisis that demands new tools to prevent the spread of this devastating disease and to conduct effective testing and tracing, a medical crisis that necessitates new modalities of treatment to heal those who are afflicted, and In the recent words of an open letter whose signatories include former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, a political crisis that threatens the future of liberal democracy. As the past has shown us, a moment of upheaval like this one, when so much upon which we have come to rely seems ruptured, is not the time to resign ourselves to despair, nor to abandon the norms, institutions, and alliances that have upheld the modern world order for nearly 80 years. There is the possibility for renewal, but, like the Farben building in Frankfurt, these foundational structures must be reimagined and infused with new ideas for a new era. Higher education will be integral to that endeavor. Time and again, across the past century, the world's great universities have been vital partners in making, sustaining, and revitalizing the world order. One need not look far for an example. In 1943, just 2 years before General Eisenhower arrived in Frankfurt, 2 government officials named Paul Nitze and Christian Herter in Washington, D.C., one a Republican, the other a Democrat, recognized the need for a graduate school that would combine the rigor and analytic power of the academy with the burgeoning field of international affairs. They called it the School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS, and it graduated its first class in June 1945, a mere month after the fall of Nazi Germany. In short order, the new school's faculty, students, and alumni, alongside experts from across government, military, and industry, proved instrumental in designing the treaties, the frameworks, and the organizations, the United Nations and North Atlantic Treaty Organization among them, that defined and sustained the international order that emerged in the wake of World War II. Now, with the publication of this volume, SAIS is once more helping to take up the core questions confronting our global community at a critical juncture in our history. This book is the product of a 2-day virtual forum hosted by Johns Hopkins SAIS in June 2020 that gathered a multidisciplinary group of exceptional scholars, thinkers, and leaders to consider collectively the future of our world order after COVID-19. The proceedings were viewed by thousands of people around the globe, from interested citizens to renowned scholars to national security experts to elected officials. Anyone who has ever organized an academic conference knows that attracting such an audience is no easy feat. To do so virtually and in the middle of a pandemic is even more astonishing. Its success speaks to the true Herculean efforts of editors and SAIS faculty Hal Brands and Frank Gavin. Alongside their able teams and the extraordinary roster of contributors to this volume. But it also indicates the genuine hunger of a wide international audience for a sophisticated, meaningful, and collaborative conversation about the future of the geopolitical landscape, one that faces head-on the vital questions of this era. How are we going to confront the massive challenges posed by new centers of global power? How are we going to adapt and reimagine our institutions to ensure that they will continue to promote human flourishing and be responsive to the needs of the most vulnerable and marginalized among us? And how can we ensure that we do not stray from the essential democratic values that have defined the modern order since its origins? The contributors to this book offer an array of bracing answers that will certainly be of great interest and use to policymakers who are implementing new measures to confront this crisis, to the students who are returning to classrooms or attending seminars virtually, and to faculty who are teaching the next generation about and in the midst of COVID-19. This global pandemic is, in so many ways, unprecedented in our lifetimes, and it will require unprecedented solutions that will profoundly reshape our world. Yet the tools for arriving at these solutions are the same as they have ever been: free inquiry, critical thought, and the passionate contestation of ideas tempered always by reason. It is my sincere hope that this robust and timely collection will inspire more of all three as we advance, steadily and slowly, into a post-COVID world. Ronald J. Daniels, President of Johns Hopkins University. Adapted from opening remarks given at the World Order After COVID-19 Forum, a Johns Hopkins University virtual event, held by the School of Advanced International Studies and the Henry A. Kissinger Center for Global Affairs, June 30th, 2020. COVID-19 and World Order. Hal Brands and Francis J. Gavin. The coronavirus crisis was a shock, but should not have been a surprise. Public health experts had been warning about the dangers of viral pandemics for years. SARS, H1N1, Ebola, and MERS had highlighted the risks of diseases that raced across borders and the need for effective national and global responses. Not long before the first reported cases of COVID-19 in Wuhan, China, both the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and the Kissinger Center for Global Affairs Senior Fellow, Dr. Kathleen Hicks, had organized separate exercises that highlighted how profoundly a fast-moving virus could endanger the international system and U.S. national security. Yet these warnings went largely unheeded, and the world was not prepared to react effectively when the crisis began. COVID-19 overwhelmed national and international efforts to contain the pandemic, while exposing deep flaws in the global public health infrastructure. The institutions most responsible for public health, the World Health Organization, WHO, for the world, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, for the United States, have not performed well. As we write, the world has seen more than 18 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 and rising. The United States has been especially hard hit, with over 5 million confirmed cases and the spread still not under control. The science and epidemiological knowledge surrounding the virus is evolving. New therapies are being developed, and intensive efforts to create an effective vaccine all provide some hope. Until then, COVID-19 will dominate the international landscape. Even after the virus is contained, the consequences will be with us for some time. This is because the pandemic arrived at an especially troubling moment for the world. In the past few years, many have commented on the fraying of international arrangements to provide for a stable, peaceful, and prosperous world order. What had been feared for some time was now seen as a stark reality. Many of the norms, institutions, and practices that upheld the liberal international order and marked American leadership since the end of the Cold War and, in some cases, the end of the Second World War, were under enormous stress. The causes are many and interconnected. The reemergence of great power political rivalry, marked by the worsening and increasingly toxic relationship between the two largest powers, the United States and China. The increase in populism and nationalism, as well as a seeming loss of faith in democracy as authoritarianism increases its grip on many parts of the world. The dizzying and disorienting effects of new technology, and numerous other causes. These challenges have manifested as a polarized United States grows increasingly uncertain about its role in the world, as many around the world lose faith in the benefits of globalization and interdependence, and as a raft of new transnational concerns, ranging from climate change to disinformation, reveal the shortcomings of existing international institutions. The crisis does provide an opportunity, however. This volume is a multidisciplinary effort to assess the current state of world order, analyze the effects of the COVID crisis, and offer insights and ideas for the future. The crisis has made clear that much work needs to be done to improve our national and global public health capabilities and institutions, and to elevate the threat of disease and pandemic to a higher priority in our national and international security frameworks. This book, however, is premised on something more: the idea that the crisis highlights a number of other pressing national and global challenges, in areas ranging from climate change to relations with China. We believe this crisis is potentially a crucial pivot point, providing an opportunity to rethink and perhaps revitalize our current international system. This book begins a much-needed conversation about how to shape international relations in a post-COVID world. World Orders, Old and New. Historically, efforts to construct effective international arrangements emerge after periods of war, crisis, and turmoil. The Peace of Westphalia ended the vicious wars of religion that had plagued Europe and constructed a comparatively stable system based on the balance of power among nation-states. The 1814 to 1815 Congress of Vienna was marked by the masterful diplomacy of Count Metternich of Austria and Lord Castlereagh of Great Britain, who worked with other European leaders to tame the wars and ideological fervor unleashed by the French Revolution. These efforts arguably kept the peace in Europe until the Crimean War and prevented any one European power from dominating the continent until the start of the 20th century. What was left of the concert system collapsed with World War I, leading to a series of efforts over the succeeding decades to rebuild world order. The Versailles Conference after the First World War was inspired by American President Woodrow Wilson's desire to build a peace based on national self-determination, open diplomacy, the ends of arms races, and collective security through a League of Nations. The cures, he believed, to the pathologies of imperialism, militarism, and cutthroat diplomacy that had brought on the conflict. This vision failed as the United States retreated from the system Wilson proposed, while lingering and unresolved grievances from the war poisoned the international climate. A global depression, the rise of violent, revolutionary regimes, and the onset of the Second World War destroyed the system created at Versailles and revealed the desperate need for effective mechanisms to generate world order. Learning from this failure, American planners worked with their allies to start constructing the post-war order before the war even ended. Conferences between the three major players, the United States, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain, at Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam, mixed plans to win the war with efforts to coordinate the post-war peace. International meetings at Bretton Woods and Dumbarton Oaks designed global institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the United Nations. American officials hoped for a seamless, integrated world order that would bring the leading nations together in avoiding war and maintaining a secure, prosperous peace. Yet the Cold War spoiled this vision of one world, and what emerged in the years and decades that followed was not one order, but several. In the economic realm, the so-called Bretton Woods Order, which was focused on the capitalist world, created a system that encouraged revitalized global trade, but prioritized domestic reconstruction, regional integration, and stability. This system frayed in the 1960s and 1970s, and after a time marked by some disorder, was replaced by the more open, globalized system we have now, based on flexible and market-determined currencies, large-scale global investment and trade, and the dominance of dollar-denominated banking and finance. International security evolved in unexpected directions as well. The United Nations system, premised on state sovereignty and universal principles, was overshadowed by a bipolar system that saw intense ideological and geopolitical rivalry between two rival superpower blocs, led by the Soviet Union and the United States. The United States ended up leading a secure, prosperous international order, but one that was limited to the free world rather than the entire world. The superpowers nonetheless cooperated to create a third order, a very successful nuclear order based upon their shared interest in limiting the dangers posed by the absolute weapon. This order was built around a series of bilateral and global arms control treaties, including the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty, the 1968 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile and Strategic Arms Limitation Treaties, as well as less formalized norms and practices, from tolerance of satellite overflights by the enemy, necessary to reduce the danger of surprise attack, and an implicit understanding, which evolved over time, that nuclear weapons were not merely powerful bombs, but were in a category all their own. Though it came under constant pressure, this element of order, rivals working to manage and limit the dangers of new technologies, was more successful than anyone expected, and perhaps provides a model for contemporary challenges. The unexpected end of the Cold War and the rapid demise of the Soviet Union highlighted both the success of these post-war arrangements and the need to rethink world order for a new era. It was also a time of great intellectual creativity, as scholars such as John Mersheimer, Francis Fukuyama, John Eikenberry, Charles Krauthammer, and Samuel Huntington offered innovative conceptual frames to understand a rapidly changing world. Events moved quickly. Germany was peacefully reunified, and the European Union project flourished. Democracies emerged around the world, and some long-simmering conflicts and civil wars were resolved peacefully. The United States, working through the United Nations, built an impressive coalition to enforce collective security and expel Iraq from Kuwait. To the surprise of many, some elements of the post-war era, such as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, were not only maintained, but expanded. Other institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund, were reimagined. Over time, still other institutions, such as the World Trade Organization, WTO, and Group of 20, G20, were inaugurated. The post-Cold War era was marked by a combination of multilateralism and American ideals and power, as the United States found itself in a commanding position in world affairs. To the extent that there was a single world order, it was largely an expansion and modification of the liberal system that had taken root in the non-communist world after World War II. As this system took on increasingly global dimensions, it was a time of hope and promise. That period of optimism now seems like a distant memory. The 9/11 attacks on the United States, followed by difficult, controversial wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, exposed new sources of insecurity. The war in Iraq, in particular, drained U.S. energies and shook international support for American power. The 2007-9 financial crisis pummeled the global economy and undermined faith in the market. Populism rose, and the movement toward democracy weakened. As China's economy boomed, that country did not, as many had hoped, embrace liberal principles, but instead challenged both regional and global norms and institutions while descending deeper into authoritarianism. Information technology, once seen as a liberating force, showed its darker side through cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. Climate change loomed as a potentially existential challenge. Both the vote of the United Kingdom to leave the European Union, Brexit, and the unexpected election of Donald J. Trump as U.S. President on a campaign of America First made 2016 the year when it was clear the existing world order was imperiled. The principles and values that many believed were the cornerstone of this order, openness and innovation, democratic practice and tolerance, interdependence and globalization, were viewed with suspicion by large swaths of America and the world. As the chapters in this volume demonstrate, COVID-19 highlighted and exacerbated many of the strains that were already testing the post-Cold War system. The pandemic was so disruptive because it exploded in a world that was already increasingly disordered. The question of how to reconstruct world order after COVID involves dealing with not just the disease, but also the underlying problems it revealed. How should we diagnose and understand these challenges to world order? And what principles and policies should shape our efforts moving forward? Answering these questions is the purpose of this book. World Order After COVID. This volume is an undertaking of the Henry A. Kissinger Center for Global Affairs at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS, inspired by its namesake, the renowned diplomat and scholar Henry Kissinger. The center is dedicated to better understanding and applying the lessons of history in order to make sense of an increasingly complex world. Since its inception in 2016, the center and its scholars have engaged deeply with questions of world order. The COVID-19 crisis has offered an opportunity to convene global experts from Johns Hopkins University and other leading institutions to understand a landmark crisis and plot a course for the future. This volume draws upon that expertise to address issues ranging from global public health and climate change to international institutions and great power rivalry. The particular challenge of our moment is that it is impossible to grapple with questions of world order without considering hard and soft security issues, novel transnational challenges and timeless geopolitical contests, and politics within states as well as politics between them. As always, addressing any of these subjects requires a historical perspective as well as an eye to the future. Part 1 of this book thus focuses on applied history and future scenarios. It includes essays that use the past to highlight overlooked or misunderstood dynamics of the current crisis, and that push us to think imaginatively about the future. These intellectual tasks are particularly important in times of radical uncertainty. In these moments, grounding ourselves in history, or systematically assessing the different paths the future might take, yields the greatest payoff. Jeremy A. Green and Dora Varga employ a historical mindset to address the most basic question we confront today. When will we move from a world of COVID to a world after COVID? The answer they offer is that we are unlikely to see any single moment that marks the end of the pandemic. Rather, there will be a gradual recession of danger that never fully goes away, and that probably will not match the easing of restrictions put in place to deal with that danger. Margaret Macmillan asks why we are so often surprised by catastrophes that might have been predicted, why some leaders and societies cope better than others, and how we can deal with the lasting consequences of great shocks, issues we can better understand by revisiting the trajectory of major upheavals in the past. Using history as a guide, Philip Bobbitt considers why many faddish predictions about the post-COVID world may be wrong, and offers his own future scenario, that of a deepening crisis of constitutional order in major nation-states, as a way of pushing us to prepare for an uncertain future. Part 2 deals with global public health and mitigation strategies. These issues are now of incontestable importance to world order because of the horrific human toll pandemics can take, and the way that epidemiological catastrophes can trigger economic and geopolitical ones. There is no guarantee, after all, that the end of COVID will bring a respite from aggressive global disease. It might mark the beginning of a new era of even more catastrophic outbreaks. In response to this danger, Tom Inglesby offers a detailed program for making pandemics lose their power, and in doing so reminds us that the dichotomy between unilateral and multilateral responses is a false one. Lainey Rutkow argues that policymakers must not, in the aftermath of the crisis, lose the sense of urgency that a pandemic creates. Rather, they must raise the profile of public health measures that are often invisible until a crisis breaks, while cultivating new collaborations and networks within and between nations. Finally, Jeffrey P. Kahn, Anna C. Mastroianni, and Sridhar Venkatapuram consider the ethics of global health in a post-COVID world. In their view, the crisis reveals the limitations of bioethics as a field and underscores the need for a more holistic conception of what makes a global health system morally just. Without such a shift, we will be ill-equipped to address global health challenges that can wreak havoc on the entire world. Part 3 moves to transnational issues, technology, climate, and food. In each of these areas, purely national solutions to accelerating challenges are unworkable, and in each of these areas, COVID-19 has highlighted the urgency of action. For Johannes Jurpelainen, a pandemic is a terrible thing to waste. He contends that the crisis, by temporarily suppressing global emissions, has created an opportunity to invest heavily in green technologies and perhaps head off the worst impacts of climate change. Jessica Fanzo reminds us that COVID will dramatically worsen food insecurity around the world, a development likely to heighten political instability, geopolitical conflict, and other forms of strife. Without food security, she tells us, there is no world order. Finally, Christine Fox and Thayer Scott point out that COVID has intensified the technological rivalry between the United States and China, and that Washington must deepen its collaboration with other democracies if it is to manage the consequences of a technological revolution that creates as many risks as opportunities. Part 4 covers the future of the global economy. In hindsight, we are likely to remember COVID-19 as an economic crisis as much as an epidemiological one, for it not only brought the global economy to a standstill, triggering the most rapid, if perhaps temporary, deglobalization the world has ever seen, but also revealed the weaknesses of existing international institutions for managing the global economy, and the dangerous dependencies globalization had created. Ben Stile argues that the pre-COVID
Sample complete. Ready to continue?